The sirens were a distant scream, a promise of a reckoning that had already arrived. Alistair Finch, a man who built an empire on fear, was on his knees. His tailored suit, worth more than a car, was creased and dusted with the grime of the ballroom floor. Around him, a forest of dark blue uniforms and the cold, unblinking eyes of federal agents. His gaze, however, was fixed on one person, the waitress, the insignificant little bird he had tried to cage. She stood by the grand entrance, her simple black dress a stark contrast to the glittering gowns of the panicked guests. She wasn't crying, she wasn't smiling. She was just watching him, her expression as calm and final as a gravestone. "How?" Alistair rasped, the word a shard of glass in his throat. "You're nobody." Clara Miller simply met his eyes, and in their quiet depths he saw the reflection of his entire world burning to the ground. 3 weeks earlier, the world had been his. The five-star restaurant, the Gilded Lantern, was his personal court. He didn't come for the food, he came for the power, for the way the air crackled with fear when he walked in. Clara had learned to become invisible when Alistair Finch held court at table 7. She'd learned to keep her eyes down, her voice a murmur, her movements efficient and silent. Tonight he was in a particularly foul mood. He'd lost a shipment at the docks, and he needed to break something to feel whole again. His eyes, cold and grey as a winter sea, swept the room and landed on her. "You!" he barked, snapping his fingers. "Waitress, come here." Clara approached, her tray held like a shield. "Yes, Mr. Finch?" He didn't look at her face. He looked at the delicate silver locket resting against her collarbone. It was her one piece of jewelry, a small, heart-shaped anchor in the turbulent sea of her life. "What is that tacky piece of tin?" he sneered. Clara's hand instinctively went to it. "It was a gift, sir." "Gifts from who? Some deadbeat boyfriend who couldn't afford a real diamond?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. His 2 brutish guards flanking the table chuckled on cue. "It was from my husband," she said, her voice tight. Alistair's smile widened. "Was. Past tense. I like that." He beckoned her closer with a flick of his fingers. "Let me see it." Reluctantly, she leaned forward. He didn't take it. Instead, with a flick of his wrist, he snatched the chain, breaking the clasp. The locket fell into his palm. Clara gasped, a small, wounded sound. "Please, sir, it's very important to me." "Everything is important to the poor," he mused, holding it up to the light. He clicked it open, peering at the tiny photo inside. It was David, in his dress uniform, his smile so bright it could have lit up the room. Ah, a soldier boy, played the hero and got himself killed for it. What a waste. Tears pricked at Clara's eyes, hot and furious. "Give it back." Alistair looked at her then, truly looked at her, and saw the defiance simmering beneath the fear. He hated it. He lived to extinguish such sparks. With a deliberate, theatrical motion, he held the locket over his glass of deep red, obscenely expensive wine. "Trinkets," he said, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Are for children." He opened his fingers. The locket dropped with a soft plink into the crimson liquid. It sank, the silver heart swallowed by the darkness, David's smiling face distorted and drowned. The violation was so profound, so personal, it stole the air from Clara's lungs. A collective gasp rippled through the nearby tables. The restaurant owner, a perpetually sweating man named Mr. Dubois, scurried over. "Mr. Finch, is there a problem?" Alistair leaned back, a king on his throne. "There is. Your waitress is incompetent. She's upset me." He waved a dismissive hand at Clara. "Fire her, or I'll buy this building tomorrow and turn it into a parking garage by Friday." Dubois turned his panicked gaze to Clara, his eyes pleading. She stood frozen. The image of the locket sinking in the wine burned into her mind. Alistair watched her, savouring her humiliation. He leaned forward, his voice a low, predatory purr. "But I'm a generous man. There's another option. I find myself in need of a wife. A pretty quiet thing to look good on my arm. You'll do. Marry me, little bird, and you'll never have to worry about a thing again. Your problems, they just disappear." He thought he was offering her a gilded cage. He had no idea he had just declared war on a ghost. Clara's apartment was a stark contrast to the opulence of the Gilded Lantern. It was a small, clean box in a part of the city Alistair Finch's limousine never drove through. But it was a fortress. The locks on the door were not standard issue. The windows had sensors that were nearly invisible. To a casual observer, it was the humble home of a grieving widow. To the trained eye, it was a safe house. She didn't cry. The time for tears was long past. Rage was a cleaner fuel. She walked to the small kitchenette and retrieved the wine glass from her bag. She'd begged a busboy to fish it out of the trash for her. Carefully, she poured the wine down the sink and retrieved the locket. She cleaned it meticulously, polishing the silver until it shone, her movements precise and economical. She opened it. David's face, a little warped by the liquid but still smiling, looked back at her. "Okay, Davy," she whispered, her voice rough. "Okay." She walked to her bedroom closet. Behind a false back panel, secured by a biometric lock, was her real life. Not a collection of Waitress uniforms, but a pelican case containing a hardened laptop, a set of high-gain antennas, and various other tools of a trade she was supposed to have left behind. She sat down, the laptop humming to life. Her fingers, which had trembled slightly while serving Alistair Finch, now flew across the keyboard with practiced, deadly speed. Code scrolled across the screen. This wasn't just any laptop. It was a ghost machine, built to slide through the darkest corners of the web unseen. Clara Miller, the quiet waitress, ceased to exist. In her place was Nix, her call sign from her days in military intelligence. She had been one of the best SIGINT analysts the army had, a digital phantom who could pull secrets from encrypted airwaves like a magician pulling rabbits from a hat. David had been the tip of the spear. She had been the eyes and ears that guided him. When he died, a part of her had died too. She had buried Nix along with her husband, seeking the anonymity of a normal life. Alistair Finch had just dug her up. She began her hunt. Finch was a creature of habit and ego. He used a top-of-the-line, military-grade encrypted phone, the Krypton X. He thought it made him untouchable. To Clara, it was a challenge. She spent an hour cross-referencing Finch's known associates with recent FCC filings for private cellular repeaters in the downtown core. She found one, registered to a shell corporation on the roof of his office building. A private tower for a private king. Arrogant and sloppy. She needed to test the waters. She cloned the public-facing signal of a local news van's satellite uplink, creating a digital tunnel. Through it, she sent a single, carefully crafted data packet toward Finch's private network. It was disguised as a routine software update request from the Krypton X's manufacturer. Inside the packet was a tiny, dormant worm. A listening post. It wasn't a full-scale assault. It was a wiretap. Alistair, sitting in his penthouse office, was boasting to his security chief, a brute named Gregor. The little waitress is going to fold, they all do. Give her a day to feel the desperation, then send the boys to remind her of my offer. Clara, miles away, listened to his voice, filtered through layers of code, clear as a bell. She analyzed the background noise, the specific hum of his building's HVAC system, the faint traffic sounds. She was building a complete picture of his world. While Finch was gloating, she noticed a slight tremor in his voice when he mentioned a rival, a man named Silvio, a micro-expression of fear. She logged it. Weakness. She then spoofed a call to Gregor's phone, making it appear as if it came from Finch's internal IT department. Using a synthesized voice, she ran a diagnostic that prompted Gregor to read back the current security system's firmware version. It was a minor piece of data, useless to anyone else. To Clara, it told her they were 2 versions behind on a critical security patch. Another crack in the fortress. Finch was too busy admiring his reflection in the polished mahogany of his desk to notice the digital ghost that had just slipped through his walls. He thought he was the predator. He had no idea he was already the prey. The next 2 days were a storm of silent activity for Clara. She ate standing up, slept in 4-hour shifts, and lived on coffee and cold fury. The listening post inside Finch's network was a gold mine. She intercepted his calls, downloaded his financial data, and mapped his entire criminal enterprise. It was a sprawling beast of extortion, money laundering, and brutal intimidation, all hidden behind a veneer of legitimate businesses. But she needed more. She needed something that would not just put him in jail, but utterly destroy the myth of Alistair Finch. On the 3rd day, Finch's patience wore out. He called her personal cell phone, a number she knew he'd have no trouble getting. "Little bird," his voice oozed through the speaker. "I've given you time to think. I trust you've come to the sensible conclusion." "I'm not interested, Mr. Finch," Clara said, her voice steady. There was a pause, then a low, dangerous chuckle. "Wrong answer. You see, I believe in motivation. I find that people become much more agreeable when you touch something they love." A cold dread, colder than anything she'd felt in the restaurant, washed over her. "What did you do?" "I paid a little visit to a friend of yours, Sergeant David Miller. Peaceful place. A little too peaceful, I thought. It needed some decoration." Clara was already grabbing her keys, her heart hammering against her ribs. "My offer no longer has an expiration date," Finch continued, his voice dripping with sadistic pleasure. "It's a standing command. You will call me by tomorrow morning and accept. Or the next time my boys visit your hero, they'll bring a shovel. Do you understand me?" She hung up, not dignifying him with a response. The drive to the cemetery was a blur. She ran through the gates, her feet flying over the manicured grass, her breath tearing at her lungs. And then she saw it. David's headstone was simple, elegant granite. Sergeant David Miller, beloved husband, a true hero. And resting against it, a jarring slash of darkness against the grey stone, was a single, perfect black rose. It was Finch's calling card, a symbol known and feared throughout the city's underworld. His mark, a desecration not of destruction, but of ownership. He was telling her that not even her husband's memory was safe from his reach. This was the final line. He had crossed from tormentor to monster. He had taken his war to hallowed ground. Clara knelt, her hand trembling as she touched the cold stone of David's name. The grief that had been her constant companion for 2 years transformed. The sorrow receded, and in its place, something new crystallized. It was hard and sharp and utterly cold. It was the ice of righteous fury. She gently removed the black rose, her fingers careful not to touch the thorns. She looked at the headstone, at the name of the man she loved. "He thinks he's untouchable, Davy," she whispered to the silent air. "He's about to find out how wrong he is." The war was no longer about defense. It was about annihilation, Alistair Finch's weekly poker game was the stuff of legend. It was held in the vaulted cellar of a private club he owned, a place of cigar smoke, hushed whispers, and the clinking of ice in tumblers of $100 whiskey. The players were a who's who of the city's corrupt elite, a city councilman, a compromised police captain, and 2 rival mob bosses who maintained a fragile truce in Finch's presence. The stakes weren't just money, they were power and respect. Tonight, Finch was on a winning streak, his laughter booming across the felt table. He felt invincible. The waitress, he was sure, was at home crying, broken, ready to crawl to him. He had no idea she was sitting in a cramped utility van parked 2 blocks away, a laptop on her knees, the glow of the screen illuminating her determined face. "Raise," Finch declared, shoving a mountain of chips into the center of the table. "Let's see who has the stomach for it." Clara had spent the last day burrowing deeper into the club's network. Their security was a joke. She had full access to the internal camera system, including the discreet overhead camera positioned directly above the poker table. She could see every card. But just exposing his hand was too simple, too crude. Humiliation required artistry. She found what she was looking for in the club's server, the control software for the table's digital shuffler. It was a sophisticated piece of machinery designed to ensure a random deal every time. A few lines of her own code, and random became a word with a new definition. The councilman, a nervous man named Peterson, was sweating. He had a good hand, but he was terrified of Finch. On her screen, Clara saw Finch's cards. A full house, kings over 7s. Unbeatable. She initiated her sequence. In the cellar, the dealer activated the shuffler for the final card, the river. The machine whirred. Clara's code intercepted the command, ran 1,000 simulations in a nanosecond, and selected the one card in the deck that could change everything. The card was dealt. It was the ace of spades. It gave Silvio, the rival mob boss, an impossible 4 aces. It was a 1 in a million draw. Silvio's eyes widened. He glanced at Finch's smug face, then back at his own cards. A slow, predatory smile spread across his lips. "You know, Alistair," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I do believe I have the stomach for it. I'm all in." The room went silent. Finch's smile faltered. It was a reckless move. He rechecked his cards. A full house. It was a monster hand. Silvio had to be bluffing. His ego wouldn't let him believe otherwise. "Call," Finch snarled, shoving the rest of his stacks forward. The pot was now worth over $2 million. "4 aces," Silvio said, laying his cards down with a triumphant snap. The air was sucked out of the room. Finch stared at the cards, his face turning a blotchy, furious red. It was impossible. He looked at the dealer, who shrugged helplessly. He looked at the machine. He looked at Silvio's gloating face. "You're cheating!" Finch roared, slamming his fists on the table, sending chips scattering. "You're all cheating!" But the real masterstroke was yet to come. Clara activated the second part of her plan. She had looped the last 5 minutes of the security footage for all cameras in the room, except for one, the camera in the hallway outside. On that feed, she superimposed a ghostly, pre-recorded image of Silvio's top enforcer slipping a wad of cash to the dealer an hour earlier. Finch's security chief, Gregor, was watching the monitors in the next room. He saw the doctored footage. "Boss!" he yelled, bursting into the cellar. "It was the dealer! I saw him on the camera taking a bribe from Silvio's man." Chaos erupted. Finch lunged for the dealer. Silvio's men jumped to their feet, hands on their concealed weapons. Accusations and threats flew across the room. The fragile alliance shattered. Finch hadn't just lost money, he had lost control. He looked weak, paranoid, and foolish in front of the very people he needed to intimidate. In the van 2 blocks away, Clara watched the implosion. She closed her laptop, a small, grim smile touching her lips. It was a victory, a satisfying sting of karma. But it was just the opening salvo. She hadn't come for his money. She had come for his kingdom. The poker game fiasco had wounded Alistair Finch's pride, but it hadn't crippled his operation. Clara knew that. The loss of face made him more dangerous, more desperate. She needed the final blow, the one piece of evidence that would bring the entire rotten structure down. Her mind went back to a stray comment David had made months before he died. He'd been on a short leave, and they were talking about his father, a longshoreman who had worked at the city's port for 40 years. "Something's not right down there, Clara," David had said. "Dad says the old union guys are being pushed out. New company, Zenith Logistics, took over the main shipping contracts. The money feels dirty." Zenith Logistics. Clara's digital reconnaissance had already flagged the name. It was Finch's largest, seemingly legitimate company. He was using it to launder millions, smuggling contraband in and out of the country under the guise of legitimate cargo. David had stumbled upon the edge of Finch's empire without even knowing it. The thought sent a chill down her spine, but it also hardened her resolve. This was for David now, too. She needed to get inside the Port Authority office. She needed the hard copy manifests, the ones that couldn't be digitally altered after the fact. Hacking from a distance was one thing. This required a physical breach. This was field work. 2 nights later, a figure dressed in black, non-reflective clothing moved through the shadows of the container yard. Clara moved with a fluid grace that belied her years behind a desk. David hadn't been the only one who received training. She carried a small pack containing a set of lockpicks, a portable hard drive cloner, and a frequency jammer. The Port Authority building was a squat, concrete block. Security was a joke, a single night watchman and an outdated camera system. She used the jammer to create a small bubble of static around the side entrance, disabling the nearest camera for a crucial 60 seconds. The lock was a standard tumbler. It clicked open under her expert touch in less than 20 seconds. Inside, the air was stale with the smell of old paper and coffee. She moved silently through the darkened hallways, a ghost in the machine. The records office was her target. The door was locked, but the key was exactly where she expected it to be, under the mat of the potted plant next to the door. Predictable. The server room was a small, humming closet. She attached the cloning device to the main hard drive. The process would take 12 minutes. 12 minutes of agonizing tension. Every creak of the building, every distant sound from the yard made her muscles tense. She was exposed, vulnerable. This was Finch's territory. As the progress bar on the cloner crawled towards 100%, she heard footsteps. The night watchman, doing his rounds. Her heart leapt into her throat. She flattened herself into the small space between a filing cabinet and the wall, pulling her black hoodie over her head, making herself a part of the shadows. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness of the main office, sweeping across the desks. He paused, humming to himself. He was so close, she could smell the cheap tobacco on his clothes. He rattled the locked door to the server room, grunted in satisfaction, and moved on. Clara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The cloner beeped softly. It was done. She detached the device, slipped out of the office, and relocked the door, leaving everything exactly as she had found it. Within minutes, she had melted back into the shadows of the port, the hard drive clutched in her hand. It was the key to Alistair Finch's ruin. Back in her apartment, the hunt began in earnest. The drive contained terabytes of data, shipping manifests, customs declarations, internal emails. It was a digital haystack. She was looking for a single, razor-sharp needle. For 48 hours she worked, her screen a blur of numbers and text. She wrote a custom algorithm to cross-reference Zenith Logistics shipments with the financial data she'd pulled from Finch's network. And then she found it. It was a pattern, hidden in plain sight. Shipments of agricultural equipment from a port in Eastern Europe. The weight on the manifests was always slightly off, a few 100 kilograms more than the declared cargo. And every time one of these shipments arrived, a massive payment was made from a Zenith account to a numbered shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. She dug deeper, pulling satellite imagery of the European port, hacking into their local database. The agricultural equipment company didn't exist. It was a phantom. This wasn't just money laundering. This was smuggling on a massive scale. Weapons. She had him. She had the needle. Now she just needed to find the perfect place to plunge it in. Alistair Finch needed to restore his image. The poker game had made him look like a volatile thug. So he did what all modern villains do. He threw a charity gala. He was to be presented with the city's Philanthropist of the Year award, an honor he had, of course, purchased with a hefty donation. The event was a masterpiece of public relations, a grand affair at the city's most prestigious hotel, attended by the mayor, the chief of police, and the cream of society. It was to be his public coronation as a legitimate businessman. Clara saw the announcement in the paper and knew. This was the stage. This was where she would bring down the curtain on his empire. Getting a job as a server for the event was surprisingly easy. The catering company was desperate for staff, but she didn't just blend in. She reached out to one person Finch had wronged, Leo, the young busboy from the Gilded Lantern who had retrieved the wine glass for her. Finch had had him fired the very next day for his act of kindness. He was now working for the hotel's catering service, bitter and angry. He became her hidden ally. "They have me on AV setup," Leo had told her over a burner phone, his voice a tense whisper. "The main presentation runs off a laptop in the control booth. It's a closed system, but there's a port. If you can get me a USB stick, I can make sure it gets plugged in." But Clara, his security is everywhere. If I get caught— "You won't," Clara had assured him, her voice calm and steady, a rock in his sea of anxiety. "Just do it when the mayor begins his introduction. All eyes will be on the stage." On the night of the gala, Clara moved through the bustling ballroom, a tray of champagne flutes in her hand. She was a ghost again, invisible in her server's uniform. She watched as Finch swept in, a conquering hero basking in the adulation of a city he owned. He was shaking hands, his smile a polished lie, his eyes sweeping the room for any sign of disrespect. Then he saw her. His eyes, which had passed over her a dozen times, finally registered who she was. A cruel, possessive smirk bloomed on his face. He dismissed his fawning entourage with a wave and strode towards her, a predator closing in on cornered prey. "Well, well," he purred, his voice a low rumble meant only for her ears, his cologne a suffocating cloud. The little bird, back in a cage where she belongs. "I have to admit, I'm impressed. I didn't think you'd have the courage to show your face. But here you are. I knew you'd come to your senses." Clara held her tray steady, her gaze meeting his without a flicker of fear. "I'm not one of your employees tonight, Mr. Finch." He chuckled, a sound of pure condescension. "No, you're not. You're my future wife, remember? Just practicing for your new duties. I trust you've finally come to accept my generous offer." He reached out and took a glass of champagne from her tray, his fingers brushing hers in a gesture of ownership. "Don't look so grim. You should be happy. You tried to fight. You lost. And now you get to live a life of luxury. It's the best deal you're ever going to get." He took a sip, his eyes never leaving hers, filled with a triumphant gleam. "You see, this is how the world works, little bird. The strong take what they want. The weak serve the champagne. You had your little moment of defiance, that cute little poker stunt. Very clever. Cost me a fortune in bribes and threats to smooth that over with Silvio. But the games are over. You played your hand and you lost. Now you're mine, just like everyone in this room." "I'm not here for a deal," Clara said, her voice even and cold. "I'm here to witness a reckoning." He laughed aloud, throwing his head back, a booming sound that made nearby guests turn and smile, assuming he was sharing a pleasant joke. "Oh, I love your fire. It'll be such a pleasure to tame it. A reckoning? Yes, I suppose it is. A reckoning for all my enemies who thought they could stop me. Tonight, this city officially becomes mine. And you, my dear, are the first of my new acquisitions." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, his breath hot on her ear. "After the ceremony, my men will escort you to my car. Don't make a scene. We have a lot to discuss about your future. Starting with your wardrobe and ending with your silence." He patted her condescendingly on the arm. "Don't go anywhere. The main event is about to begin. You'll have a front row seat to see what real power looks like." He turned and walked away, moving toward the head table, the king returning to his throne. He had no idea he was walking to his own execution. The evening dragged on through a nauseating parade of sycophantic speeches. Finally, the mayor, a man whose campaign Finch had bankrolled, took the stage. "A man of vision, a pillar of our community. It is my great honor to present the Philanthropist of the Year award to Mr. Alistair Finch." The room erupted in polite, obligatory applause. Finch strode to the stage, beaming, his chest puffed out with pride. He accepted the heavy glass trophy, holding it aloft for the flashing cameras. He stepped to the podium, the warm lights making him glow, ready to deliver a speech about civic duty and giving back that Clara knew he hadn't even written. Behind him, the giant screen displayed the gala's logo. In the AV booth at the back of the room, Leo saw Clara's almost imperceptible nod. His hand was shaking, but he slid the USB stick she'd given him into the laptop's port. A small window popped up. He clicked, "Run." "Thank you, Mayor," Finch began, his voice smooth and magnanimous. "I am truly humbled by this incredible honor. When I look out at this great city, I don't see bricks and mortar. I see potential. I see family." Clara, positioned near a service exit, pressed a button on a small, discreet remote in her hand. The logo on the screen behind Finch vanished. It was replaced by a single line of stark white text on a black background, looking like a bank statement from hell. "Act, Norsefm 2 B14999 Cayman National Trust. Current balance, $47,250,000. Beneficiary, A. Finch." Finch faltered, his words catching in his throat. He glanced behind him, his smile freezing. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. He tried to laugh it off. "Ah, a little technical glitch, it seems. My apologies. As I was saying." Then a new voice, clear and amplified, echoed through the ballroom's state-of-the-art speaker system. It was calm, female, and utterly chilling. It was Clara, speaking into a wireless microphone she'd concealed on her person, its signal patched directly into the audio feed. "That's not a glitch, Mr. Finch," her voice rang out, devoid of emotion. "It's a ledger, a private one. Tell me, is that the account where you deposited the $1.5 million bribe to Councilman Peterson for the Zenith Logistics shipyard contract?" At his table, Peterson went white as a sheet, knocking over his water glass with a trembling hand. The sound of the clatter was unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Panic began to bloom in Finch's eyes. He scanned the crowd, a cornered animal searching for the hunter. "Who is that? What is the meaning of this? Security! Shut that off!" But Clara wasn't finished. Her voice dropped, taking on a razor's edge that cut through the noise. "Or perhaps it's the one you used to pay the 2 men who desecrated the grave of Sergeant David Miller. The payment was for $5,000. Was that what my husband's memory was worth to you?" A collective, horrified gasp sucked the air from the room. The name, the specific, vile accusation, hung in the air like poison. Women covered their mouths, and men who had been shaking Finch's hand moments before now stared at him with open disgust. Finch's face was now a mask of pale, sweaty rage. "Lies! This is slander!" he roared into the microphone, his voice cracking. "These are baseless accusations from a disgruntled employee." "Are they?" Clara's voice replied, as cool as a tombstone. She pressed another button. The screen changed again. A waveform appeared, and from the speakers, a recording of Finch's own voice filled the hall, the audio cleaned and amplified by her software. "I paid a little visit to a friend of yours, Sergeant David Miller. My offer is a standing command, or the next time my boys visit your hero, they'll bring a shovel. Do you understand me?" The recording ended with his cruel, self-satisfied laughter. That laughter, stripped of its context and power, now sounded monstrous, echoing in the horrified silence of the grand ballroom. The mask was not just gone, it had been incinerated. The pillar of the community stood revealed as a ghoul. "That proves nothing!" Finch shrieked, his composure shattered, spittle flying from his lips. "It's been doctored! It's a deep fake! You can't prove a thing!" "You're right," Clara's voice said, a final terrible calm in her tone. "A voice can be faked, so let's try something that can't be." She pressed the last button. The screen flickered to life with high-resolution satellite imagery. The feed was time-stamped from 3 weeks prior, showing the Zenith Logistics Terminal at the city port. The image zoomed in on a container being unloaded. The manifest, which Clara had superimposed in the corner of the screen, clearly read, "Agricultural equipment, tractors." But as the container doors swung open, the contents were unmistakable. Crates of military-grade assault rifles. The screen split, showing a bank transfer from Silvio's organization to Finch's Cayman account, dated the same day. And then the audio kicked in. It was another of Finch's encrypted calls she had intercepted, now laid bare for the world to hear. "The shipment is in," Finch's voice said, tinny and clear. "Silvio's people are going to be very happy. Make sure the tractors are loaded on top before customs does their walk-through. I don't pay the port commissioner to have his men actually do their jobs." It was over. The video loop of guns being unloaded from a container labeled "Tractors" played over and over behind him as his own voice damned him from the speakers. It was irrefutable. It was absolute. Chaos erupted. People were on their feet, shouting, pointing, their faces a mixture of disgust and fear. The mayor was backing away from the podium, as if Finch were radioactive. The flashbulbs of the press cameras were like strobe lights, capturing every twitch of his unraveling. He stood frozen in the spotlight, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock, the heavy glass award slipping from his numb fingers and shattering on the stage with a deafening crash. He had been publicly gutted, his power, his reputation, his very identity annihilated in front of the entire city. As guests scrambled for the exits, they found them blocked. Not by Finch's men, but by dark-suited federal agents, moving with quiet, implacable efficiency. The anonymous data drop Clara had sent an hour earlier, containing the entire cloned hard drive, the audio files and the satellite evidence, had been received and acted upon with swift, decisive force. The lead agent, a man named Harris, walked onto the stage. Finch didn't even seem to see him. His wild eyes scanned the room, finally locking on Clara as she stepped out from the shadows near the entrance. She was no longer wearing the server's apron. She just stood there, watching him. "You," he breathed, the word a venomous hiss. "You did this. A waitress." "I told you I was here to witness a reckoning," Clara said, walking calmly towards the stage as two agents hoisted Finch to his feet. "You accepted an award you didn't deserve. Now you're about to accept the consequences you do." "I'll kill you," he screamed, struggling against the agents. "I'll ruin you. I own this city. I own everyone." Clara stopped a few feet from him, her expression unreadable. "You don't own anything, Alistair. You just rent it, and your lease is up." She held up her hand, showing him the locket. "You know, I should thank you. When you dropped this into your wine, you were so busy enjoying my humiliation, you didn't notice me switching your glass with a fresh one. The one you left behind gave me a perfect set of your fingerprints and a DNA sample from the rim. It was the last key I needed to decrypt your personal financial server. Your arrogance wasn't just your weakness, it was my weapon." For the first time, he saw the silver locket around her neck was open. His eyes strained to see the tiny photo of the soldier, but there was something else glinting beside it. A small, polished insignia, barely the size of a thumbnail. Agent Harris followed Finch's gaze, and his eyes widened in recognition. "That's the unit crest for Task Force Omega," Harris whispered to his partner, a note of profound awe in his voice. "They don't even officially exist." Finch finally understood, and the understanding was a colder terror than any prison sentence. He hadn't been toying with a waitress. He had declared war on a shadow. He wasn't just a criminal. He was an enemy of a world he couldn't comprehend, a world where David and Clara Miller had lived. As the agents hauled him away, his expensive suit now looking like a cheap costume, Clara unbuttoned the top of her simple black dress. Pinned to the fabric underneath was not a military medal of valor, but something rarer. The Distinguished Intelligence Cross, the highest civilian award for extraordinary heroism in the service of the intelligence community. An award for silent, unseen victories. They dragged Alistair Finch past the people he had terrorized for years. Mr. Dubois from the restaurant, who stood tall for the first time in years. Silvio, who gave a slow, satisfied nod. The poker players he'd cheated. They didn't cheer. They just watched, their faces grim, their silent dignity a more profound condemnation than any shout. He was nothing, a ghost already. The next morning, Clara stood before David's grave. The black rose was gone, replaced by a simple bouquet of white lilies. The stone was clean, the grass was green, and the sun was warm. In her hand she held the morning paper. The headline in giant block letters read, "Philanthropist of the Year arrested in arms trafficking and terror plot." His empire was in ashes. She gently touched his name carved into the granite. "You said something was dirty at the docks, Davy," she whispered, the wind carrying her words away. "I cleaned it up. That man. He thought he could own everything. He thought he could own your memory. But he was wrong. Love is the one thing men like him can never touch. It's stronger than their money, stronger than their fear." A single tear, the first she had allowed herself to shed, traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sorrow, but of release. "It's over now. It's finally over. Rest now, my love." She closed the locket, the two halves of her life, the soldier and the spy, the husband and the wife, clicking together as one. Then she turned and walked away, A quiet woman leaving a quiet cemetery, her shadow long in the morning light, finally at peace. Like, share, and comment your thoughts on this ending.